The door slammed so hard that the wedding photo on the hallway table rattled against the wood. He stood in the living room, hands still raised mid-gesture from their argument, watching the space where his wife had just been. The echo of her words hung in the air like poison gas. "Don't call me. You don't control me." 5 years of marriage, and it had come to this. Again, he walked to the window and watched her get into her car, tires squealing as she peeled out of the driveway. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the 10th time. Every disagreement, every attempt at a serious conversation about their future, their finances, their relationship, it all ended the same way. She'd storm out, disappear for hours or sometimes the whole night, ignore his calls, and return the next day acting as if nothing had happened, and like a fool. He'd always let her back in. He sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. The argument replayed in his mind. It had started so simply he'd asked her about the credit card bill. Nearly $8,000 in charges he didn't recognize. Designer bags, expensive dinners at restaurants they'd never been to together. Hotel stays in the city where her girls' nights apparently required overnight. Accommodations. When he'd asked, not accused, just asked, she'd exploded. "You're always interrogating me. I work hard. I deserve to spend money on myself. Who are you to question me? I'm your husband," he'd said quietly. "And that's our joint account. I'm not saying you can't spend money. I'm just asking what these charges are for." That's when she'd grabbed her purse and headed for the door. That's when he'd made the mistake of asking where she was going. "Out, and don't call me. You don't control me." The thing was, he'd never tried to control her. He'd bent over backward to give her freedom, space, independence. He'd supported her career changes, her hobbies, her friendships. He'd been patient through her mood swings, her accusations, her pattern of running away instead of communicating. But somewhere along the way, his patience had become permission. His kindness had become weakness. His love had become a doormat. He looked around their home, the home he'd worked overtime to afford, the mortgage he paid while she spent their savings on things she'd never discuss. Photos of happier times mocked him from every surface. Their wedding day, where she'd promised to be his partner through everything. Their honeymoon, where she'd called him her rock, her safe place. When had that changed? Or had it always been this way, and he'd just been too in love to see it? His phone sat on the coffee table, silent. Part of him wanted to call her, to apologize for whatever she thought he'd done wrong, to smooth things over so she'd come home and they could pretend everything was fine. That's what he'd always done before. But another part of him, a part that had been growing stronger with each slammed door, each night spent wondering if she was safe, or just didn't care enough to let him know. That part was tired, exhausted, done. He picked up his phone, but instead of calling her, he opened his messages and scrolled through their recent conversations. His messages: "Are you okay? Please just let me know you're safe. Can we talk about this?" Her messages, mostly one-word responses, emojis, or hours of silence followed by, "I'm fine. Stop being so clingy." When had caring about your spouse become clingy? When had expecting basic respect and communication become controlling? He thought about his parents, married 40 years, still holding hands at the dinner table. He thought about his sister, who'd left her husband after 2 years of similar treatment, and how everyone had said she'd given up too easily. But he'd watched her flourish after that divorce, watched her find someone who actually valued her. Was he giving up if he stopped accepting disrespect? Or was he finally standing up for himself? The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. She'd been gone for 3 hours. His phone remained silent, no call, no text, no acknowledgement that she'd left her husband sitting alone after a fight. He stood up, his decision crystallizing with each passing second. He walked to the garage and pulled down the stack of boxes he'd been meaning to use for storage. One by one, he carried them upstairs to their bedroom. "Then don't come back," he whispered to the empty house. This time, he meant it. Dawn broke through the bedroom curtains, painting everything in shades of gray. He'd been awake all night, but he'd never felt more clear-headed. 6 cardboard boxes lined the hallway, each one carefully packed with her belongings. Clothes, shoes, the expensive handbags she'd hidden in the back of her closet, tags still attached to some of them. Jewelry he'd given her for birthdays and anniversaries, probably worth thousands of dollars. But worth nothing if she didn't value the relationship they represented. He'd been methodical, almost mechanical. Every item he packed was a memory he examined and set aside. The dress she'd worn on their first anniversary, he'd planned a surprise weekend getaway, but she'd complained the entire time that the hotel wasn't nice enough. The perfume he'd saved for months to buy her, she'd worn it twice before switching to a different brand. The photo album she'd never looked at after their wedding, filled with pictures of a life she seemed increasingly disinterested in living. His best friend, James, arrived at 7 in the morning, 2 cups of coffee in hand, and a locksmith's van parked behind him. "You sure about this?" James asked, handing him a cup. There was no judgment in his voice, only concern. "I've never been more sure of anything," he replied. "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep living like I'm the villain in my own marriage, just for expecting basic respect." James nodded. He'd witnessed enough of their fights over the years. Had bitten his tongue too, many times when she'd belittled his friend at dinner parties or flirted with other men right in front of him. The locksmith, a weathered man in his 60s named Tom, worked efficiently. "Been doing this job 30 years, he said as he installed the new deadbolt. "I can always tell the difference between someone making a mistake and someone making the right call." "This feels like the right call, son. How can you tell?" he asked. Tom paused, looking him directly in the eye. "Because you're not angry. Angry people change locks to punish someone. You're calm. You're just protecting yourself. There's a difference." By 9 a.m., the locks were changed. The boxes were stacked neatly on the front porch, covered with a tarp in case of rain, and he'd called a lawyer. The consultation was scheduled for Monday morning. James lingered in the kitchen. "What happens when she shows up?" "I'm going to tell her exactly what I told her last night. Don't come back. It's over. She's not going to believe you," James said quietly. "She never does. I know. That's why her things are on the porch. That's why the locks are changed. I'm not giving her the option to steamroll me this time." His phone buzzed. A text from her, the first communication in 9 hours. "Staying at Sarah's. Be home this afternoon. We need milk. We need milk." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Can we talk?" Just a casual demand, as if the fight had never happened. As if she hadn't abandoned her husband for the night, without a word about where she was, or if she was safe. He typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on. "Don't come back. Your belongings are on the front porch." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The response was immediate. "What?" Then, very funny. Then, "Stop being dramatic." Then, "I'll be there in 20 minutes." He turned his phone face down on the counter. James squeezed his shoulder. "You want me to stay?" "No, I need to do this myself. But thank you for everything." After James left, the house felt impossibly quiet. He walked through each room, seeing it with new eyes. The living room where they'd hosted friends, who'd slowly stopped coming over because she'd always pick fights or make scenes. The kitchen where he'd made countless dinners that she'd eaten while scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging his effort. The bedroom where they'd slept back to back for months, the distance between them growing every night. When had he become so small in his own home? When had he started apologizing for things that weren't his fault? Walking on eggshells, measuring every word to avoid her explosive reactions? His therapist's words from last month echoed, "You can't love someone into treating you better. At some point, you have to decide what you're willing to accept." He'd reached that point. Actually, if he was honest, he'd reached it months ago. Maybe years ago. He'd just been too afraid to admit it. 17 minutes after her text, he heard her car in the driveway. He stood at the front window, watching as she parked and got out, her face already set in an expression of annoyed dismissal. She was wearing the same clothes as last night, and he felt a flash of something not quite jealousy, but a distant cousin of it. Where had she really been? She stopped when she saw the boxes on the porch. Her head tilted, confusion crossing her features. She looked at the front door, then back at the boxes, then pulled out her keys. He watched as she tried her key in the lock. Once, twice, 3 times. Harder each time. Then she started pounding on the door. "Open this door right now. This is my house too." He took a breath and opened the door, but stood in the frame, blocking her entry. Her eyes widened. "What is this? What are you doing?" "Exactly what I said. You're not coming back. It's over." She stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. For a long moment, she didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there with her mouth slightly open, shock registering across her face. Then, as he'd seen 100 times before, the shock transformed into anger. "You can't lock me out of my own house." Her voice climbed to a shrill pitch. "This is insane. Over one argument?" "It's not one argument," he said calmly, though his heart was hammering. "It's every argument. It's the pattern. It's the disrespect, the disappearing, the refusing to communicate like an adult." "Oh, so you're the victim now?" She laughed, but there was panic underneath it. "You're being controlling and ridiculous. Let me in so we can talk about this." No, that single word seemed to hit her like a physical blow. "What do you mean, no? You can't just, I can, and I am. Your things are right here." He gestured to the boxes. "Everything's there. I was careful. I even packed that necklace your grandmother gave you, the one you keep in the blue velvet box." She glanced at the boxes, then back at him, her expression shifting between disbelief and calculation. He could almost see her mind working, trying to find the angle, the words, the manipulation that would work this time. "Baby, come on." Her voice softened, the endearment sounding foreign after months of her barely using his name. "You're upset, I get it. I shouldn't have left like that. But you were interrogating me about money, treating me like a child. I asked you about charges on our joint credit card. That's not interrogation. That's a normal conversation between married people. You were using that tone. What tone? My calm tone? The one I'm using right now?" He felt something unfamiliar rising in his chest. Not anger exactly, but a solid wall of certainty. "Do you hear yourself? You're mad at me for my tone while asking about $8,000 in unexplained charges. But you think it's fine that you stormed out, ignored me all night, and didn't bother to tell me you were safe until 9 hours later? I'm a grown woman. I don't have to check in with you." "You're right," he said. "You don't. But you do have to treat your spouse with basic respect. You do have to communicate. You do have to be a partner. And you haven't been any of those things for a long time." Her face flushed. "So what? You've been keeping score? Making a list of my faults? What kind of husband does that? The kind who's been trying to save his marriage while his wife has been checking out of it." His voice remained steady. "I've been to therapy, alone, because you refused to go. I've read books on communication. I've tried talking to you calmly, tried giving you space, tried everything I could think of. And every single time, you throw it back in my face and storm out. I storm out because you make me feel trapped. No, he said quietly. You storm out because it works. Because you know, I'll sit here worrying about you. And when you come back, I'll be so relieved that you're okay that I'll drop whatever issue we were discussing. Well, not anymore. She took a step toward the door, and he saw the shift in her strategy. Her eyes filled with tears, real or manufactured. He could no longer tell. Please, can we just talk inside? Like adults? I know I mess up sometimes, but you're my husband. We took vows. We did, he agreed. Vows that included respect, honor, and partnership. You broke those vows every time you treated me like the enemy instead of your partner. One more chance, she pleaded. Let me prove I can change. He'd heard these words before. After the time she'd emptied their savings account for a business opportunity that turned out to be a pyramid scheme. After the time he'd found messages on her phone from a guy she swore was just a friend. After the time she'd missed his father's funeral because she'd been too overwhelmed, but had posted Instagram stories from a beach resort that same weekend. Each time he'd believed her. Each time he'd given her another chance. And each time nothing had changed except his own diminishing sense of self-worth. I gave you chances, he said. Years of chances. I gave you my patience, my understanding, my trust. And you treated all of it like it was worthless. That's not fair. What's not fair is making me feel crazy for having basic expectations. What's not fair is making me apologize for your behavior. What's not fair is spending 5 years trying to be enough for someone who's made it clear I'll never be enough. She went quiet, studying his face. You're serious. You're actually serious, yes. So what? You're just going to throw away 5 years of marriage? Just like that? I'm not throwing it away. You did? Piece by piece, every time you chose yourself over us. He felt tired suddenly, bone-deep tired. I loved you. I loved you so much that I lost myself trying to make you happy. But I can't do it anymore. Her tears were falling freely now, and he felt a pang not of doubt, but of grief for what they could have been if she'd ever met him halfway. Where am I supposed to go? Her voice cracked. You have family, friends. You texted me that you stayed at Sarah's last night. So that's it? You're just going to abandon me? The irony of that statement, coming from someone who'd abandoned him emotionally for years, would have been funny if it wasn't so painful. I'm setting a boundary. Something I should have done a long time ago. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. This is my lawyer. You should get one too. We'll handle everything through them. She took the card with shaking hands, staring at it like it was a death certificate. In a way, it was the death of their marriage, finalized in ink and legal terms. This is because I wouldn't tell you where I was last night, isn't it? Her voice turned cold. You're jealous. There it was, the deflection, the attempt to make this about his supposed flaws instead of her actual behavior. This is because you don't respect me, he corrected. And I'm done living with someone who doesn't respect me. Fine. She snatched up her purse from where she dropped it. Fine. You want to do this? We'll do this. And when you realize what a mistake you're making, don't come crawling back to me. He almost laughed. Even now, at the end, she couldn't help but frame herself as the prize he was foolishly giving up. Goodbye, he said simply, and closed the door. The silence after she left was absolute. He stood with his back against the door, listening to her car start, the engine revving angrily before she sped away. Through the window, he watched her boxes still sitting on the porch, abandoned in her rage. He'd have to deal with those eventually, but not now. Now, he just needed to breathe. His phone started buzzing almost immediately. First her, then unknown numbers, Probably her friends or family members she'd already spun her version of events to. He turned it off and set it on the counter. The house echoed with emptiness, but it was a different kind of emptiness than before. When she'd been here, the space had felt hollow, filled with tension and unspoken resentment. Now it just felt quiet, peaceful, almost. He made himself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. The same table where they'd eaten countless meals in silence, where he'd tried and failed to start conversations that went nowhere. The morning sun streamed through the window, dust motes dancing in the light, and he realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd noticed something simple and beautiful like that dot. When had his life become so small? When had he stopped noticing the world around him because he was too busy managing her moods, anticipating her reactions, trying to prevent the next explosion? His sister called around noon. He'd turned his phone back on, and hers was the only call he answered. "James told me," she said without preamble. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I think so. I feel lighter, somehow, but also like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop." "She'll come back," his sister said. "You know that, right? Once she realizes you're serious, she'll try every manipulation in the book." "I know. And Mom's going to have opinions." He laughed bitterly. His mother had never been his wife's biggest fan, but she'd also been raised in an era where you made marriage work no matter what. "Yeah, I'm sure I'll hear about how I didn't try hard enough." "You tried harder than anyone should have to," his sister said firmly. "I watched you shrink yourself for years trying to make her happy. I watched you apologize for things that weren't your fault. I watched you turn into someone I barely recognized. I've been waiting for you to do this. Why didn't you say something? Would you have listened?" He considered that. Probably not. Some lessons you have to learn yourself, no matter how many people try to warn you. They talked for an hour, his sister sharing her own experience, leaving her ex-husband, the relief and terror that had come in equal measures, the way she'd second-guessed herself 1,000 times before finally accepting she'd made the right choice. The hardest part, she told him, was realizing that I'd stayed so long not because I loved him, but because I was terrified of admitting I'd made a mistake. Like if I left, it meant I'd wasted all those years. But you know what? The years I spent trying to make it work weren't wasted. They taught me what I will and won't accept. The only waste would be staying and losing more years to someone who doesn't value me. After they hung up, he walked through the house again, but this time not with grief, with possibility. That corner where she'd insisted on putting a massive decorative vase he'd always hated, he could move it. The bedroom walls she'd painted a dark burgundy had made the room feel like a cave. He could repaint them. The garage she'd filled with impulse purchases that never got used, he could clean it out, maybe set up a workshop like he'd always wanted. For 5 years, he'd been living in someone else's vision of what their life should be. Maybe it was time to figure out his own. The doorbell rang at 3 p.m. He looked through the peephole and saw her mother standing there, arms crossed, mouth set in a grim line. He opened the door, but didn't invite her in. "What did you do to my daughter?" she demanded. "Hello, Patricia. I asked her to respect our marriage and our finances. She chose to leave instead. She said you locked her out, that you won't even talk to her. She stormed out last night after I asked about $8,000 in charges on her credit card. She ignored my calls all night, texted me at 9 this morning to say we needed milk, and acted like nothing had happened. When I told her I was done with that pattern, she called me controlling." Patricia's expression didn't change. "Marriage is about compromise. I've been compromising for 5 years. I compromised myself into someone I don't recognize. I'm done. She loves you. If this is what her love looks like, I don't want it." His voice was calm but final. I deserve respect. I deserve honesty. I deserve a partner, not someone who treats me like an ATM and an emotional punching bag. You're making a mistake. She just needs time to mature. She's 32 years old, Patricia. If she hasn't learned how to treat people with basic respect by now, I'm not waiting around while she figures it out at my expense. Patricia's face turned red. Our family doesn't divorce. Your family doesn't respect boundaries either, apparently. He started to close the door. This conversation is over. If she wants to communicate, it goes through lawyers. Have a good day. He closed the door on her sputtering protests and locked it. His hands were shaking, but he felt oddly proud of himself. He'd never stood up to Patricia before. She'd always steamrolled him the same way her daughter did, and he'd let her because he was trying to keep the peace. How much of himself had he sacrificed on the altar of keeping the peace? His phone exploded with messages after that. Her friends, mostly, some sympathetic, some accusatory. He read through them once, then blocked all the accusatory ones. The sympathetic ones surprised him, apparently. He wasn't the only one who'd noticed the way she treated him. One message stood out. From her best friend Rachel. I know you probably won't believe this, but I'm glad you finally did it. You deserve so much better. I told her 100 times she was taking you for granted, but she wouldn't listen. I'm sorry it came to this. He sat with that for a long time. Even her own best friend had seen it. Had everyone seen it except him? Or had he seen it and just refused to acknowledge it because acknowledging it meant doing something about it? That night, alone in his house with new locks and old wounds, he ordered pizza and watched a movie he wanted to see, an action film she would have hated. He didn't have to negotiate. Didn't have to compromise. Didn't have to justify his choice or endure her sighs and eye-rolls. It was such a small thing. Choosing his own movie on a Saturday night. It felt like freedom. 3 weeks later, he sat in his lawyer's office, signing the final divorce papers. The proceedings had been surprisingly quick. She'd tried to fight for the house, for alimony, for half of everything. But her own behavior had worked against her. The $8,000 in charges? Turned out she'd been spending money on a friend she'd been seeing on the side. The lawyer had found hotel receipts, dinner reservations for 2, gifts purchased with their joint account. She'd been having an affair. Maybe not a physical one, she swore it wasn't, but an emotional one at minimum. Spending their money on someone else while her husband sat at home, wondering what he'd done wrong. When confronted with the evidence, she'd fallen apart. Tears, apologies, promises that it meant nothing, that she'd end it, that she wanted to work on their marriage. But by then, he'd already seen behind the curtain. He'd already realized that her version of love looked like betrayal, and her version of partnership looked like him giving everything while she took whatever she wanted. You're sure about this? His lawyer asked, a kind woman in her 50s who'd handled enough divorces to know the signs of relief versus regret. I've never been more sure of anything, he said, and meant it. The house sold within a month. They split the proceeds down the middle. His lawyer had advised fighting for more given her infidelity, but he didn't want to drag it out. He just wanted to be free. He took his half and found a smaller place across town, a 2-bedroom condo with a balcony overlooking a park. It was his space, decorated with his choices. Filled with peace instead of tension. His friends came out of the woodwork. People he'd lost touch with during the marriage, because she'd always found reasons they shouldn't attend gatherings, or she'd create drama when they did. James helped him move, along with 3 other guys he'd barely seen in years. We missed you, man, one of them said. We tried to stay in touch, but she made it so difficult. Always starting arguments at parties, always demanding you leave early. It was easier to just stop inviting you guys. He'd lost friends to her behavior. Lost time, lost himself, lost years he could have spent building a life instead of managing her chaos. but he was finding himself again. Slowly, piece by piece, he started going to the gym, picked up hobbies he'd abandoned, photography, hiking, cooking actual meals instead of frozen dinners eaten in silence. He joined a book club at the local library and was surprised to find himself laughing at jokes, engaging in debates about literature, enjoying the company of people who didn't make him feel like he was walking through a minefield. 4 months after the divorce was finalized, he ran into her at the grocery store. She looked different, thinner, harder around the edges. She was with someone, a guy he didn't recognize, holding hands in the produce section. She saw him and went pale. The guy noticed and asked her something. She shook her head, whispered something, and they hurried toward checkout. He felt nothing. No anger, no jealousy, no lingering pain. Just a vague sense of relief that it was someone else's problem now. At the checkout line, his eyes caught on a woman struggling with a bag that had split, apples rolling across the floor. Without thinking, he helped her gather them up. "Thank you so much," she laughed, embarrassed. "I swear I wasn't trying to make a fruit salad on the floor." He smiled. It's a bold new shopping strategy. Her name was Elena, and she was a teacher at the elementary school near his new condo. They talked for 20 minutes in the parking lot, and when they finally said goodbye, she'd written her number on his receipt. "In case you ever need help not dropping your groceries," she said with a grin. He didn't call her right away. He wasn't ready, not quite yet. But he kept the receipt, and the possibility of it felt like hope. 6 months post-divorce, he was sitting on his balcony with morning coffee when his phone rang. Her number, he'd never blocked it, just never answered. But something made him pick up this time. "Hello?" "Hi." Her voice was small, tentative. "I know I shouldn't call. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Really sorry. For everything." He waited, saying nothing. "I was going through some stuff, seeing a therapist now, and I've realized how badly I treated you. How much I took you for granted. You tried so hard, and I threw it away." She paused. "I threw us away." "Okay," he said simply. "Is there any chance?" "No. I'm different now. I'm working on myself. I ended things with him. I'm alone, and I've had time to think about what I really want." "I'm glad you're working on yourself," he interrupted gently. "I really am. But that doesn't change what happened. And it doesn't change that we're not good for each other. We could be," she whispered. "If we both tried. I tried for 5 years. I tried until I had nothing left. I'm not going back to that." Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, "Are you happy?" He looked out at the park, at the morning joggers and dog walkers, at the life happening all around him. He thought about Elena, who he'd had coffee with twice now, who listened when he talked and shared her own stories without making him feel small. He thought about his friends, his hobbies, his peaceful home where he never had to walk on eggshells. "Yeah," he said. "I am." "I'm glad," she said, and he thought she might actually mean it. I hope someday I can be happy too." "I hope so too," he said honestly. "But you won't find it by looking backward. Trust me on that." After they hung up, he sat with his coffee and watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. His phone buzzed a text from Elena asking if he was free for dinner this weekend. He smiled and typed back, "I'd love that." There was a time when he thought love meant sacrifice, meant shrinking yourself to fit someone else's vision, meant enduring disrespect because surely it would get better. Surely if he just tried harder, surely if he just loved enough. But he knew better now. Real love was supposed to expand you, not diminish you. It was supposed to be built on respect, trust, and partnership, not manipulation, betrayal, and one-sided effort. He'd learned the hard way what he wouldn't accept. But more importantly, he'd learned what he deserved, and he'd never settle for less again. The door that had slammed shut that night had felt like an ending. But really, it had been the beginning of a life where he was valued, respected, and free to be himself. He finished his coffee, grabbed his camera, and headed out to photograph the sunrise. There was a whole world out there waiting, full of people who would appreciate his kindness instead of exploiting it, who would meet his effort with their own, who would choose him the way he chose them. The locks had changed, but so had he, and this version of himself stronger, wiser, no longer willing to accept crumbs when he deserved the whole meal. This version was someone he was proud to be.